The wolf pup should have been dead. 3 days without food, left leg caught in an illegal trap. Winter closing in fast across the Alaskan interior with temperatures that would kill anything warm-blooded in hours. Kira Vance found it at dawn, whimpering in the snow beneath a cluster of black spruce trees, and despite every survival instinct she had developed over 6 years of living alone in this wilderness, screaming that she could not afford the risk, she freed it. The trap was military-grade, the kind that had no business being in these woods. She worked carefully, her bare fingers going numb as she pried the steel jaws apart. The pup snapped at her twice before understanding she was help, not threat. When it finally came free, Kira lifted all 12 pounds of trembling fur and carried it 2 miles back to her cabin through snow that came up past her knees. She set the leg using techniques learned in another life. She fed it from her own dwindling supplies, broiled rabbit that was supposed to last her 3 more days. Because this was her territory now, all 40,000 acres of unmarked, unmapped wilderness that the government had forgotten existed. And in her territory, the innocent were protected. What she did not know, could not have known as she wrapped that small broken body in her only spare blanket, was that rescuing that pup had just put her on a collision course with 24 hunters who believed she was something she was not. And by the time they learned the truth, half of them would be walking back out of these woods with their pride in pieces and their certainty shattered. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar acts of courage where you are from, people who stood up for those who could not protect themselves. Kira checked the wolf pup one more time, ensuring the splint would hold, then stepped outside into air, so cold it hurt to breathe. The cabin sat in a natural hollow, invisible from above unless you knew exactly where to look. She had chosen this location 4 years ago for precisely that reason. Concealment. Distance. Survival. The nearest town was 80 miles southeast, accessible only by bush plane or a week-long hike that would kill anyone unprepared for what this land demanded. She preferred it that way. Preferred the silence broken only by whine through pine and the occasional distant wolf song. Preferred a world where the only tracks in the snow were animal, not human. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. Check the perimeter snares. Gather deadfall for the wood stove. Melt snow for water. Scan the tree lean for anything unusual. It was during that final check, standing on the ridge above her cabin with binoculars scanning the eastern approach, that she saw it. Smoke. Not the thin gray thread of a campfire, but thick black columns rising from where the old mining road cut through the valley. Someone had burned something large. Recently, Kira felt her pulse quicken. In 6 years, she had encountered exactly 4 other humans in these woods. 2 lost hunters she had quietly redirected away from her territory. One researcher studying wolverine populations who she had watched from concealment until he left. One Alaska State Trooper searching for a missing hiker who she had left alone because his purpose was righteous. For people in 6 years, the smoke meant a 5th. Or worse, many more than that. She packed light, a habit that had saved her life more times than she could count. Knife. Feed a starter. Emergency blanket. Compass she did not need, but carried anyway. The Remington 700 hunting rifle stayed behind. If she needed a weapon, she had done something wrong. Kira moved through the forest the way her grandfather had taught her on the Apache reservation, where she had spent childhood summers, before the army, before everything that came after. She read the land. Every broken twig told a story. Every compressed patch of moss revealed a trail. Every bird call signaled what moved below the canopy. The smoke led her 3 miles northeast to a section of woods she avoided because it bordered the one thing in this wilderness she protected even more carefully than her own solitude. The sanctuary. Kira crouched behind a fallen hemlock and studied the scene below. The old mining road had been barricaded with a burned-out pickup truck, still smoldering, clearly torched within the last hour. Tire tracks in the snow showed 2 vehicles had approached, stopped, then reversed away at high speed. Someone had been here. Someone had been looking. And someone had sent them a message by destroying their forward position. She knew who. Mira Chun did not tolerate threats to the women and children hidden in the valley beyond. Kira had found Mira 2 years ago, half dead from exposure and running from something she would not name for another 6 months. FBI analyst turned fugitive. Victim turned survivor. Now the unofficial leader of 11 women and 6 children who had all fled to this wilderness because the world outside had failed them. Domestic violence survivors. Witness protection failures. Women whose abusers had money, connections, power enough to corrupt the systems meant to keep them safe. Kira had given them what no court could. Distance. Anonymity. A chance to heal where no one would find them. She descended to the mining road and examined the tire tracks more closely. Military tread pattern. Heavy vehicle, probably Humvee or similar. 2 sets, which meant at least 8 personnel, maybe 12. The tracks headed back east toward the nearest Forest Service access point, but the pattern of the retreat told her this was not over. This was reconnaissance. They would return with more vehicles, more personnel, a plan that accounted for resistance. Kira photographed the tracks with the small digital camera she kept for exactly this purpose, then moved quickly toward the sanctuary perimeter. She needed to warn Mira, needed to know if anyone had been spotted, needed to understand what had drawn attention to a place that was not supposed to exist. The sanctuary occupied a natural box canyon with a single entrance Kira had helped fortify 3 years ago. Camouflage netting stretched between trees. Motion sensors disguised as deadfall. A fence line that looked like random brush, but would stop any vehicle that tried to push through. 20 yards from the entrance, Kira paused and made the bird call signal. 3 short whistles, pause, too long. The response came immediately. 2 short, 1 long. Safe to approach. She slipped through the hidden gate and found Mira waiting with a hunting rifle across her lap. Stress written clearly across her face, despite her attempt at calm. You saw them, Mira said. It was not a question. 2 vehicles, Kira confirmed. Military configuration. They got close enough to scout the perimeter before you torched their forward position. Mira stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder with movements that spoke of recent training. They had a drone. Small one, probably commercial grade. Tomas shot it down before it got imagery of the canyon interior, but they saw the fence line. They know something is here. Kira felt ice form in her stomach. A drone meant planning. Resources. Technology that did not match local law enforcement capabilities. Who sends a tactical team with drone surveillance into federal wilderness? Mira met her eyes with an expression Kira had learned to read over 2 years of partnership. The expression that meant the past was catching up. FBI, Mira said quietly. Or someone using FBI credentials. Director Paulson knows I am alive, which means he knows you have been hiding me, which means he has convinced someone you are worth hunting. How long until they come back? Hours, Mira said. Maybe less. Tomas is moving the children to the northern cache point now. The other women are packing emergency supplies. If we have to evacuate, we can be gone in 30 minutes. Kira looked past Mira toward the cluster of cabins deeper in the canyon, where she could see women moving with controlled urgency, helping children into winter gear, loading packs with food and medical supplies. 17 people who had rebuilt their lives here. 17 people who deserved better than running again. We are not evacuating, Kira said. Not yet. They do not know what they are walking into. This is our territory, and anyone who comes here looking for a fight is going to learn exactly what that means. Mira studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What do you need? Time, Kira said, and every advantage we can create before they realize their target is not a fugitive in hiding. She is a woman who knows every inch of these woods better than they know their own names. She left Mira coordinating defensive preparations and climbed to the highest ridge overlooking the eastern approach. From here, she could see 20 miles on a clear day. Today the sky was sharp blue, visibility perfect, temperature dropping toward the brutal cold that would hit after sunset. She glassed the tree line systematically, looking for the signs she knew were coming. It took 14 minutes to find them. They are 8 miles out, barely visible even with magnification. Helicopter. Bell UH-1. Military surplus. heading directly toward her position at low altitude. They were not hiding their approach. They thought they were hunting someone desperate and afraid, someone who would run at the first sign of superior force. Kira smiled without humor and began calculating terrain advantages. Let them come, she thought. Let them bring their vehicles and their drones and their absolute certainty that they are the hunters in this scenario. The Alaskan wilderness had taught her many lessons in 6 years. The most important one was this: the predator who underestimates their prey does not survive to make that mistake twice. She watched the helicopter grow larger against the sky, watched it begin its search pattern over the valley where they thought they would find an easy target. And she began to plan exactly how 24 trained hunters were going to learn they had walked into the territory of someone who had been winning fights in places far worse than this since before most of them finished basic training. Colonel Wade Brennan studied the topographical map spread across the hood of his Humvee and felt the familiar weight of command settle onto his shoulders. 24 men, elite tracking specialists pulled from 3 different military branches. 2 weeks of preparation. 1 target. The briefing had been clear, delivered by FBI Director Marcus Paulson himself, with the kind of gravity reserved for genuine national security threats. Kira Vance, former Army specialist, suspected domestic terrorist, possibly armed and extremely dangerous. Last known location: 40,000 acres of Alaskan wilderness that had swallowed her 6 years ago. Brennan had run manhunts in Afghanistan, in the jungles of South America, in urban environments where every civilian could be hostile. He had never lost a target. He did not intend to start now. The helicopter touched down in a clearing 2 miles from their insertion point, rotor wash kicking up snow in blinding sheets. Brennan waited for his team leaders to disembark before stepping out himself. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes approached first, young but competent, handwritten notes already covering his tactical planning sheet. Staff Sergeant Chun and Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo followed, representing the Army and Marine contingents respectively. Behind them, 20 more operators assembled with the quiet efficiency of men who had done this hundreds of times before. They looked ready. They looked confident. Brennan wondered if any of them understood they were hunting someone who had survived alone in conditions that killed experienced outdoorsmen every year. "Sir," Hayes began, "thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures in the valley sector. 2 stationary structures, 1 mobile. No vehicle signatures. Target appears to be on foot." Brennan nodded, filing the information away. He had reviewed Kira Vance's service record 14 times. Army tracking specialist, top of her class at Fort Benning, deployed twice to Afghanistan where she had located high-value targets that entire battalions had failed to find. Then nothing. Honorable discharge under circumstances the file would not specify. 6 years of silence. And now Director Paulson claimed she had become radicalized, dangerous, a threat that required immediate extraction. Something about the briefing had felt incomplete, but Brennan had learned long ago that field commanders did not get complete pictures. They got missions. His mission was clear. The briefing packet included satellite imagery from 3 months ago showing what appeared to be a single cabin in a heavily wooded area. No roads, no power lines, no communication infrastructure. Whoever Kira Vance had become, she had committed completely to isolation. Brennan divided his force into 4 teams of 6. Alpha Team would establish a perimeter on the northern approach. Bravo would take the southern valley. Charlie would secure the eastern ridge. Delta would remain mobile as rapid response. Classic encirclement, proven effective against lone targets who relied on mobility for survival. By nightfall, they would have her contained. By dawn, they would have her in custody. "What do we know about her combat capability?" Chun asked, reviewing the briefing documents with a skeptical expression that Brennan had come to respect over 3 previous operations together. "Small arms qualified," Brennan replied. "No advanced combat training on record. Tracking specialist, not infantry. Her advantage is terrain knowledge, not tactical skill. We counter that with superior numbers, technology, and coordination." She did not look convinced, but nodded acceptance. Okonkwo asked the question Brennan had been expecting. "Sir, The briefing mentions suspected terrorist activity, but provides no specifics. No targets, no incidents, no actual crimes beyond evading federal custódia. What exactly are we preventing? Brennan met her eyes directly. He had served with Okonkwo in Syria, trusted her judgment, valued her willingness to ask hard questions. Director Paulson indicated there is classified intelligence suggesting imminent threat. Our role is extraction and containment, not investigation. We bring her in, alive if possible, and let the FBI determine the rest. It was the answer he was authorized to give. It was not the answer that sat comfortably in his gut. But military discipline meant executing orders even when the complete picture remained obscured. He checked his watch. 1,400 hours. 6 hours of daylight remaining. Alpha Team, move to insertion point North 7. Bravo, South 4. Charlie, establish overwatch on Ridge 2. Delta, stand by for my command. Comm checks every 30 minutes. Rules of engagement are restrictive. Non-lethal force only unless directly threatened. Questions? There were none. The teams dispersed with practiced efficiency, disappearing into the tree line in groups of 6. Brennan watched them go and thought about the other reason he had accepted this mission. 3 years ago, his sister Emily had vanished while hiking in Alaska. Different region, different circumstances, but the wilderness was the same. Brutal, unforgiving, capable of swallowing people without trace. Search and rescue had found nothing. The case had gone cold within months. Every time Brennan operated in Alaska, part of him was still searching, still hoping for the impossible closure that the wilderness rarely granted. Hayes remained behind with Delta Team, waiting for final orders. The lieutenant had good instincts, better than most officers his age. Sir, Hayes said quietly, something about this feels off. No warrant on file that I can access. No actual crimes listed beyond the generic terrorism suspicion. Target profile does not match radicalization patterns. Former Army, honorable discharge, no criminal history, no extremist contacts. Why are we really here? Brennan had asked himself the same question. Because Director Paulson has authority to request military assistance for domestic threats, he replied. Because our orders come through proper channels. Because questioning the mission in the field undermines operational effectiveness. You have concerns, you document them in your after-action report. Until then, we execute. Hayes nodded, but Brennan could see the doubt had not disappeared, merely been suppressed. Good. Officers who questioned nothing made dangerous mistakes when reality diverged for briefing. They moved to the operations tent that Delta Team had established, a camouflage command post with communication equipment linking all 4 teams. The radio crackled with position reports. Alpha Team at North 7, beginning patrol pattern. Bravo Team at South 4, establishing observation post. Charlie Team encountering difficult terrain on Ridge 2, delayed 15 minutes. Then silence. Brennan waited 30 minutes for the scheduled check-in. When it came, the voice belonged to Alpha Team leader, Sergeant Vega. Sir, we have found something. Burned vehicle on the old mining road, still warm. Someone torched it within the last 2 hours. Tire tracks indicate tactical retreat, possibly hostiles aware of our approach. Hostiles plural, Brennan noted. The briefing had described a lone fugitive. He keyed his radio. Describe the scene. Defensive action or message. There was a pause. Message, sir. Whoever burned this wanted us to know they are ready. They wanted us to see the barrier. This was not panic. This was preparation. Brennan felt the mission parameters shifting in his mind. A lone fugitive prepared defenses. A lone fugitive had advance warning of their approach despite operational security that should have been airtight. A lone fugitive had resources and tactical awareness that the briefing had not mentioned. He thought about Kira Vance's service record, the parts that were documented and the suspicious gaps that were not. What kind of tracking specialist earned an honorable discharge under classified circumstances? What had she done in Afghanistan that required her skills to be buried under redactions? Alpha Team, maintain position and document everything, Brennan ordered. Bravo and Charlie, hold your positions. Delta with me. we're going to take a closer look at what we are actually dealing with. The flight to the burned vehicle took 8 minutes. Brennan used the time to review what he knew and what he suspected. Paulson had been insistent about urgency, about the need for immediate action. Paulson had personally selected the teams, bypassing normal request channels. Paulson had classified the intelligence that supposedly justified this operation. And Paulson had not mentioned that the target might have help, resources, or advance warning of federal approach. Too many gaps, too many inconsistencies. But the mission remained valid until evidence proved otherwise. The helicopter set down 50 yards from a burned truck. Brennan approached with Hayes and 2 Delta operators, weapons ready but not raised. The scene told a clear story. 2 vehicles had approached this position, possibly planning to use the mining road as access to the interior. Someone had intercepted them here, destroyed the forward vehicle, forced them to retreat. The burn pattern showed accelerant use, professional work, complete destruction of any useful intelligence the vehicle might have contained. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Hayes knelt beside the tire tracks, measuring tread pattern with a small ruler. Military surplus, he said. Humvee or similar. 2 vehicles, probably 8 to 12 personnel. They retreated fast. These tracks show panic driving. Whatever scared them off did it efficiently. Brennan studied the tree line. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone who had just demonstrated they could detect and defeat a reconnaissance element before it penetrated their perimeter. Someone who fought with tactics, not desperation. Sir, one of the Delta operators called from the far side of the burned truck. You need to see this. Brennan crossed to where the operator stood, pointing at a small digital camera mounted to a tree branch with zip ties. Motion-activated trail camera, standard hunting equipment, aimed directly at the road approach. Whoever was watching had documented their arrival, had footage of their vehicles, their personnel, possibly their faces. The camera had been placed recently, dirt still fresh around the mounting point. This was not permanent security. This was specific response to specific threat. They knew we were coming, Brennan said quietly. How is that possible? Hayes asked. This operation was classified. Minimal personnel, encrypted communications, need Tano basis only. Brennan did not have an answer, but standing in front of that camera, looking at the burned vehicle that represented a message he was only beginning to understand, he felt the certainty that had carried him through the briefing start a fracture. They were not hunting a desperate fugitive. They were entering the territory of someone who had turned 40,000 acres of wilderness into a fortress. And somewhere in those woods, Kira Vance was watching them stumble into her world with the patience of a predator who knew the terrain, knew the stakes, and knew exactly how this was going to end. Kira watched Alpha Team from a position they would never think to check. Not from high ground where tactical doctrine said Overwatch belonged, but from below, concealed in a natural depression beneath a deadfall pine where the thermal signature read as nothing more than decaying wood generating residual heat. She had been lying motionless for 40 minutes, breathing slowly, counting the 6 men as they moved through the forest with the confidence of operators who had never encountered terrain that fought back. They were good, professional. Their spacing was correct, their communication discipline tight, their weapons handling expert. They were also walking directly into the first of 17 traps she had prepared in the 3 hours since spotting that helicopter. Sergeant Vega led the element, and Kira marked him as the most dangerous. He moved differently than the others, reading the ground the way someone who had actually survived hostile wilderness learned to read it. He paused at irregularities, checked sight lines before committing to advance, kept his team tight without clustering them into a single target zone. Former infantry, she guessed, probably with combat deployments where paying attention meant survival. The others were competent but complacent, trusting their equipment and numbers more than their instincts. That trust would cost them. She waited until Alpha Team passed her position, then moved. Not away, but parallel, using the natural sound dampening of deep snow to mask her movement. The forest this far north had its own rhythm, its own language. Wind through spruce carried different frequencies than wind through birch. Animal movement created patterns distinct from human disturbance. Kira had spent 6 years learning to speak this language fluently, and now she used it to become a ghost moving through her own territory while 6 trained hunters walked past completely unaware. The first trap was simple. A game trail that looked like the obvious route through dense undergrowth, marked with subtle signs of use that would draw anyone trying to move efficiently through difficult terrain. Kira had reinforced those signs yesterday, adding broken twigs at the right height, compressed snow at the right intervals, even scattered scat from a bull moose to suggest large animal traffic. What the trail actually led to was a wash carved by spring runoff, hidden beneath a layer of snow that would support a deer, but not a 200-pound man in full tactical gear. She heard the shout before she saw the result. Alpha 4, the operator on point after Vega, had stepped on what looked like solid ground and dropped 6 feet in a freezing water that instantly soaked through his winter gear. His rifle clattered against rocks, the sound echoing through the forest like a bell. By the time his teammates pulled him out, Kira had circled to their rear and removed 3 critical items from their equipment cache. Radio repeater, spare battery packs, medical kit. Vega immediately called for status check, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. Alpha 4 soaked, possible hypothermia risk, need immediate extract to base camp. Alpha 6 established security perimeter. The team moved into defensive positions, exactly as trained, exactly as predicted. They had encountered an obstacle. They would report it, regroup, continue the mission. What they did not know yet was that the obstacle had intelligence, mobility, and 6 years of experience turning this exact terrain into a weapon. Kira moved to position 2, while Alpha Team coordinated their casualty evacuation. The radio traffic gave her everything she needed. They were operating on a 30-minute check-in schedule. They had 4 teams in the field. Command Element was mobile, currently investigating the burned vehicle site. Perfect. She marked the timing in her mind and continued to the second trap, a crossing point on what appeared to be a frozen stream. The ice was real, thick enough to support weight. What was not real was the stability of the rocks on the far bank, carefully loosened and balanced so that any attempt to climb up would trigger a controlled slide. Not dangerous, just humiliating and exhausting. The kind of obstacle that degraded morale and consumed time without providing clear evidence of hostile action. Alpha 2 and Alpha 3 hit it 20 minutes later. Kira heard the crash of falling rocks, the cursing, the scramble to recover dropped equipment, now scattered across 30 yards of streambed. She photographed it from concealment, documentation that might matter later, then moved again. 3 down, 3 still mobile. But Vega was getting suspicious. She could hear it in his radio calls, the way he started questioning whether they were experiencing bad luck or deliberate opposition. The man was smart, adapting faster than she had hoped. That meant accelerating the timeline. The third trap was her favorite. A cache of supplies visible through a break in the trees, positioned exactly where an exhausted team might spot it and investigate. MRE wrappers suggested recent occupation. A tarp bundle implied stored equipment. In reality, the entire setup was attached to a spring-loaded branch tensioned with paracord. Anyone who touched the tarp would release the tension and get hit with a face full of snow and pine needles hard enough to knock them down. Non-lethal, but deeply embarrassing for trained operators. Alpha 5 took the bait. Kira watched through binoculars as he approached the cache, called for Vega to clear it, then reached for the tarp. The branch released with a crack like a gunshot, catching him square in the chest and sending him sprawling backward into the snow. His teammates rushed to help, weapons raised, scanning for threats that were not there. In the confusion, Kira took Alpha 6, the rear security, with the oldest trick in the tracking handbook. A pile of their own equipment, staged 20 yards from their current position, visible through the trees. While the team was focused on Alpha 5, Alpha 6 moved to investigate. Kira dropped a loop of paracord over his shoulders from above, yanked him off balance, and had him zip-tied with his own restraints before he could shout. She left him propped against a tree with his radio smashed and his supplies scattered, a note pinned to his chest that read, "Leave. You do not know what you are protecting him from." Vega found Alpha 7 minutes later. The radio erupted with disciplined fury. "Base, this is Alpha Leader. We are under active engagement. Hostile has neutralized 4 of 6 team members using non-lethal traps and ambush tactics. Target is highly trained, familiar with counter-tracking, demonstrating clear tactical awareness. Request immediate backup and permission to shift to aggressive pursuit." Brennan's voice came back hard and controlled. Alpha Leader, pull back to Rally Point Zulu. Bravo and Charlie teams converge on Alpha's last known position. Delta is airborne in 5 minutes. All teams, target is confirmed hostile and actively engaging. Rules of engagement remain non-lethal, but close protection is authorized. She wants to fight, we give her one with overwhelming force. Kira smiled without humor and began her withdrawal. For operators neutralized in under 2 hours. Command now treating her as legitimate threat instead of frightened fugitive. The psychological advantage had shifted. But more importantly, she had bought time. Time for Mira to move the children to the northern cache. Time for the women to prepare secondary defenses. Time to study how these hunters operated under pressure so she could predict their next move. She melted back into the forest, leaving no trail, using techniques her Apache grandfather had taught her and the army had refined. Behind her, she heard the helicopter approaching, heard teams rallying, heard the controlled chaos of a manhunt shifting from confident pursuit to wary engagement. 20 hunters remained. Each one now knew they were not chasing a target. They were entering a territory defended by someone who understood that the wilderness was not neutral ground. It was home, and home was always worth fighting for. Kira reached a prepared cache point 3 miles from the sanctuary, changed into dry clothes, ate a cold meal of jerky and nuts, and reviewed her map. She had created 17 distinct ambush points between here and the canyon entrance. The hunters had just experienced 3 of them. 14 remained, and somewhere in those woods, Colonel Wade Brennan was realizing that the mission briefing had left out the single most important detail about Kira Vance. She was not hiding in the wilderness. She had become part of it. And anyone who walked into her world without understanding that was going to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating the woman who had 6 years to prepare for exactly this fight. Brennan authorized the thermal imaging and night vision equipment. With a tight jaw and growing frustration, he refused to let show in front of his teams. For operators neutralized in under 2 hours. Not injured, not killed, but removed from a field through a combination of terrain knowledge and tactical precision that spoke to training far beyond what the briefing had indicated. He studied the note that had been pinned to Alpha 6. The words burning in his mind with implications he did not want to examine too closely. You do not know what you are protecting him from. Not them. Him. Singular. Specific. As if this entire operation was not about national security at all, but about one man using federal resources for personal purposes. Bravo team deployed at 1800 hours as darkness settled over the Alaskan wilderness like a physical weight. 6 operators equipped with the best technology the military could provide, moving in a loose formation designed to maximize sensor coverage while maintaining mutual support. Staff Sergeant Chun led them with the methodical patience of someone who had survived Helmand Province by never assuming the enemy was where sensors said they should be. Thermal imaging showed 3 heat signatures ahead, 1 mobile, 2 stationary. Command wants the mobile signature contained, Chin told his team. Non-lethal engagement, but anyone takes a shot at you. Return fire is authorized. Target has proven hostile intent. Treat this as a combat operation. They moved through the forest using night vision that turned darkness into green-tinted clarity. Every tree stood out in sharp detail. Every depression in the snow registered as potential cover. The equipment was superior to anything a civilian could acquire, military-grade optics that should have provided overwhelming advantage against a lone target operating without power source or technological support. What the equipment could not account for was that Kira Vance had spent 6 years learning to fight without technology, to use the wilderness itself as both weapon and concealment in ways that made thermal imaging worse than useless. The first indication that something was wrong came when Bravo 2 lost contact. No gunshot, no shout, just a brief crackle of static, and then silence. Chun halted the team immediately, hand signals ordering defensive positions while he tried to raise the missing operator. Bravo 2, report status. Nothing. Bravo 2, if you can hear this, key your radio twice. Still nothing. Chun felt his pulse elevate despite years of training to remain calm under pressure. They were 6 operators with state-of-the-art equipment in terrain they had mapped and planned for. One woman should not be able to disappear one of his men without anyone noticing. She hit Bravo 4 next, and this time they heard it. A soft thud, a muffled curse, and then Bravo 4's thermal signature simply vanished from their display. Not moved away, not fallen, vanished, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Chun ordered his remaining 4 into a tight perimeter, backs together, weapons out, scanning 360 degrees for a threat that refused to present itself. The thermal imaging showed nothing human-sized within 100 yards. The night vision revealed only trees and snow and the undisturbed stillness of wilderness at night. But 2 of his men were gone, and Chun knew with absolute certainty that they were being hunted by someone who understood their equipment better than they understood the terrain. Kira watched from a position that thermal imaging could not detect because she was not generating a heat signature different from her surroundings. She had buried herself in a snow cave insulated with pine boughs. Her body temperature lowered through controlled breathing, her heat signature blending into the ambient cold that registered as background on their sensors. She had taken Bravo 2 by using the oldest trick in asymmetric warfare. Create what the enemy expects to see, then exploit their trust in technology. A heated chemical pack placed on a branch at human torso height had drawn his attention. While he investigated, Kira had dropped on him from above, used his own weapon sling to bind him, and dragged him into a prepared cache point before his team noticed his absence. Bravo 4 had fallen to a similar deception. Thermal decoy, physical ambush, immediate removal. The trick worked because sophisticated equipment made operators lazy. They trusted their sensors more than their instincts, saw what the technology showed them instead of questioning whether the technology could be fooled. Now the remaining 4 were clustered together, afraid of the dark despite their night vision, jumping at shadows despite their training. Good. Fear made people predictable. Predictable made them vulnerable. She took Bravo 3 with a technique she had learned from an old Ranger instructor at Fort Benning who had survived Vietnam by understanding that sometimes the best weapon was patience. She simply waited. Waited for the team to move, waited for their formation to stretch as they navigated difficult terrain, waited for the precise moment when Bravo 3 lagged behind to adjust his pack. Then she moved with speed that would have impressed her drill sergeants, covering 15 feet in absolute silence, hitting pressure points that dropped him without a sound, zip-tying his hands and feet with practiced efficiency. She left him conscious this time, wanted him to carry a message back. She leaned close and whispered directly into his ear. Tell your commander that every person he sends into these woods is walking into a home they were not invited to. Tell him I am not his enemy unless he makes me one. Tell him to ask Director Paulson why he really wants me captured. She released him from the zip ties, knowing his pride would keep him quiet about the encounter for at least 10 minutes, long enough for her to reposition. As predicted, Bravo 3 waited until she was gone before keying his radio with shaking hands. Bravo leader, this is 3. I was engaged and released. Target delivered verbal message. She knows about Director Paulson. She is asking questions about mission legitimacy. Chun pulled his team back immediately, recognizing when a tactical situation had shifted from hunting to survival. They extracted with 3 of 6 operators, 2 missing, 1 compromised. The after-action report Chun delivered to Brennan was blunt to the point of insubordination. Sir, this target is not civilian. She has counter-surveillance training, advanced hand-to-hand capability, and intimate knowledge of sensor limitations. She is neutralizing trained operators faster than we could deploy them, and she is asking questions about our mission legitimacy that suggest she knows more about why we are here than we do. Brennan listened to the report in the command tent with Hayes standing beside him, both men processing implications that grew darker with each lost operator. The lieutenant spoke first, voicing what Brennan was thinking. "Sir, 8 operators neutralized in 6 hours. 0 casualties on our side, but also 0 tactical advantage gained. Target is demonstrating restraint, using non-lethal methods, but delivering a clear message that she could kill if she chose to." Combined with her questions about Paulson and her note about protecting someone from him, I think we need to request clarification on mission parameters before continuing operations. Brennan wanted to agree. Every instinct trained by 20 years of military service told him that operations conducted on incomplete or false intelligence led to disasters that destroyed careers and lives. But he also had orders, chain of command, and the uncomfortable knowledge that questioning those orders in the middle of an operation was the fastest way to be relieved and replaced by someone who would ask fewer questions. He made the compromised decision that he would later recognize as his first critical mistake. We continue the operation, but I am calling Director Paulson directly for clarification. Charlie and Delta teams hold position. No further offensive action until I have answers. The satellite phone connection took 3 minutes to establish. Paulson answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the irritation of someone interrupted during important work. "Colonel Brennan, I hope you are calling to report successful extraction." Brennan kept his voice neutral and professional. "Sir, we have encountered complications. Target is demonstrating advanced tactical capability and has neutralized 8 operators using non-lethal methods. She has also made statements suggesting this operation is not about national security, but about a personal matter involving you specifically. I need clarification on the intelligence that justified this mission before I risk more personnel." The silence that followed lasted long enough that Brennan wondered if the connection had dropped. When Paulson spoke again, his tone had shifted from irritation to something harder. "Colonel, your mission is extraction of a suspected domestic terrorist. The intelligence is classified. The authorization comes from the highest levels. Your job is not to question the legitimacy of federal operations. Your job is to execute orders. Don't need to find someone who can do that." It was a threat delivered with bureaucratic precision. Follow orders or be replaced. Brennan felt anger rise in his chest, but forced it down through discipline that had been hammered into him since basic training. "No, sir. We will complete the mission. But I am formally requesting that you personally confirm the intelligence justifying lethal force authorization if our operators are directly threatened." Another pause. Then Paulson's voice, cold now, stripped of any pretense at courtesy. "Lethal force is authorized if needed to protect federal personnel or complete the mission. Bring Kira Vance, Colonel. Alive is preferable. Dead is acceptable. Failure is not." The line went dead. Brennan stood holding the silent phone and felt the final pieces of doubt crystallize into certainty. This was not a legitimate counterterrorism operation. This was something else entirely, something that made a federal director willing to authorize lethal force against a woman who had not killed anyone, who was asking questions instead of attacking, who was defending a position instead of fleeing. He looked at Hayes and saw his own doubts reflected in the young lieutenant's expression. "We have a problem," Brennan said quietly. "A big one. And I think the only person who can help us understand it is the woman we are supposed to be hunting." Charlie team deployed at 0400 hours with orders that made Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo deeply uncomfortable. Aggressive pursuit. Lethal force authorized. No more restraint. No more careful engagement. 6 operators moving fast through pre-dawn darkness with instructions to locate and contain the target by any means necessary. Okonkwo had served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and she recognized a shift from law enforcement operation to combat mission. The problem was they were not fighting enemy combatants in a war zone. They were hunting one woman in American wilderness, and nobody had adequately explained why that woman deserved to die. The terrain Charlie team navigated was brutal even by Alaska standards. Dense undergrowth choked the spaces between trees. Hidden ravines waited beneath innocent-looking snow cover. The temperature had dropped to -15 degrees, cold enough that exposed skin froze in minutes, cold enough that equipment malfunctioned and batteries died faster than predicted. Okonkwo pushed her team forward anyway, following thermal tracks that showed a single heat signature moving parallel to their position about 200 yards east. The target was staying ahead of them, not fleeing but not engaging either, leading them deeper in a wilderness that grew more hostile with every mile. Kira knew exactly where she was leading them, away from the sanctuary, away from the women and children who depended on her protection, toward the section of her territory where the land itself became a weapon that required no human intervention. She had scouted this route 6 months ago, mapping every hazard, every natural trap, every place where the unwary would find themselves in immediate danger. Now she used that knowledge to draw 6 heavily armed operators into terrain they were not prepared to handle. The first casualty was not Kira's doing. Charlie 5 stepped on what he thought was solid ground and broke through a layer of ice covering a sinkhole fed by a thermal spring. The water was not frozen because it stayed just warm enough year-round to prevent ice formation, a geological quirk that made it invisible under fresh snow. He went up to his waist, the shock of sudden immersion driving the air from his lungs in a gas that frosted instantly in the cold air. His teammates pulled him out within seconds, but the damage was done. Wet clothing in -15-degree weather meant hypothermia within minutes, frostbite within an hour. Charlie 5 needed immediate evacuation or he would die. Okonkwo called for extraction and kept moving. 5 operators now, and the thermal signature ahead had stopped moving. The target was waiting, had chosen ground for confrontation. Every tactical instinct Okonkwo possessed screamed that this was a trap, that the smart move was to pull back and reassess. But orders were orders, and the mission was clear. She advanced with her team spread in a skirmish line, weapons ready, fingers on triggers, prepared for whatever waited ahead. What waited was a clearing that looked like perfect ambush terrain. Natural cover on 3 sides. Clear sight lines. High ground overlooking the approach. Okonkwo halted her team at the tree line and glassed the area with binoculars, looking for any sign of the target. Movement caught her eye on the far ridge, a figure standing openly, not concealed, backlit by the first hint of dawnlight. The target was waving, not threatening, not aggressive, waving like she was trying to get their attention for something important. Charlie team, hold position, Okonkwo ordered. Something is wrong about this. The target has no reason to expose herself unless she wants us to see something. Charlie 2, you see anything that explains this? Before anyone could answer, the explanation made itself obvious. A sound like distant thunder rolled across the clearing, growing rapidly louder. Not thunder, avalanche. The ridge above them, already unstable from recent temperature fluctuations, had been triggered by something. Later investigation would show climbing rope anchored to trees at the top, a simple mechanical trigger that released tons of snow with carefully calculated timing. But in that moment, all Okonkwo knew was that a wall of white death was cascading down the slope directly toward her position. She screamed the order to retreat, even as her team scattered. 3 operators made it clear. 1, Charlie 4, caught the edge of the slide and went tumbling. Okonkwo herself felt the snow hit her like a physical blow, driving her sideways into a tree that probably saved her life by keeping her from being swept away entirely. When the roar stopped and silence returned, she found herself buried to her chest, Charlie 4 unconscious 20 yards away, and the target skiing down the slope they had just tried to climb with movements that spoke to years of backcountry experience. Kira reached Charlie 4 first, checked his breathing, his pulse, the obvious compound fracture in his left leg. She pulled medical supplies from her pack, the same supplies she had taken from Alpha Team 2 days ago, and began stabilizing the injury with practiced efficiency. Okonkwo struggled free from the snow and raised her weapon, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Do not move. Do not touch him. Step away now, or I will fire. Kira did not look up from her work, her hands steady as she applied a splint. If you shoot me, he dies. That fracture has compromised his femoral artery. Without immediate treatment, he is maybe 10 minutes before he bleeds out internally. Your choice, Sergeant. Kill the woman trying to save your teammate, or let me finish the job. Okonkwo held the weapon steady, training warring with instinct. The target had just triggered an avalanche that had nearly killed them all. But now that same target was providing emergency medical care with skill that looked professional, possibly military. Nothing about this mission made sense anymore. Why are you doing this? Why save him after trying to kill us? Kira finished securing the splint and finally looked up, her eyes meeting Okonkwo's with an intensity that carried no fear, only exhaustion and determination. I was not trying to kill you. If I wanted you dead, you would be. That avalanche was aimed to scatter, not bury. To convince you to stop before someone actually dies. Your man needs a hospital in the next 2 hours, or he loses that leg. Call your commander. Get him evacuated. Then ask yourself why a suspected terrorist is saving the life of someone sent to kill her. She stood slowly, hands visible, making no threatening moves. Okonkwo kept the weapon trained on her, but did not fire. The rest of Charlie team arrived, weapons raised, surrounding the target who made no attempt to flee or fight. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo keyed her radio with one hand, weapons still steady in the other. Command, this is Charlie Leader. We have the target contained. We also have 2 casualties requiring immediate evacuation. And I am formally requesting mission suspension pending review because nothing about this situation matches the briefing we received. Brennan's voice came back immediately. Charlie Leader, what is the target status? Is she armed? Is she threatening? Okonkwo looked at Kira, who stood calmly with hands at her sides, medical supplies scattered around the injured operator she had just treated. No, sir. She is unarmed. She is non-threatening. And she just saved Charlie 4's life after we entered terrain she deliberately led us into. Sir, I think we need to have a conversation about who we are actually hunting and why. There was a long pause. Then Brennan's voice, carefully controlled. Maintain position. I am coming to your location personally. Nobody fires unless directly attacked. Is that understood? Understood, sir, Okonkwo replied. She lowered her weapon slightly, but did not holster it. The target remained motionless, waiting with the patience of someone who knew this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment the first helicopter entered her airspace. Kira studied the operators surrounding her and saw doubt replacing certainty. Saw questions forming where blind obedience had been. Good. Doubt was the first step toward truth. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the cold morning air. My name is Kira Vance. I am not a terrorist. I am not a fugitive. I am a woman protecting 17 innocent people from a corrupt federal official who wants them dead, because one of them escaped his nephew's abuse and can testify about crimes that go all the way to the FBI director's office. You were lied to. Your mission is based on fabricated intelligence. And the man who sent you here, Director Marcus Paulson, is the real criminal in this situation. One of the Charlie team operators, young, maybe 25, lowered his weapon entirely. Ma'am, are you saying there are civilians you are protecting? Women and children? Kira nodded. 11 women. 6 children. All domestic violence survivors. All hiding from abusers with connections powerful enough to corrupt the system that should protect them. I have been keeping them safe for 2 years. Fed them. Sheltered them. Taught them to survive. And now your commander has been manipulated into trying to destroy the only sanctuary they have. Okonkwo felt the mission framework she had been operating under collapse entirely. If this was true, if they were not hunting a terrorist but had become the weapons of an abuser seeking revenge, then everything they had done the last 3 days was not law enforcement. It was complicity in domestic violence on a federal scale. She looked at her injured teammate, stable now because the woman they had been sent to kill had chosen to save him instead. She looked at her remaining operators, all of them carrying the same doubt she felt. And she made the decision that would define the rest of her career. "Charlie team stands down," she said firmly. "We hold this position, we wait for the colonel, and we get answers before anyone else gets hurt." She looked directly at Kira. "You try to run, I will stop you. But you're not being treated as hostile unless you give me reason. Understood?" Kira allowed herself a small smile. "Understood, Sergeant. Thank you for choosing to think instead of just follow orders. Your colonel is going to have a lot of questions. I have spent 2 years preparing answers. The only question that matters now is whether he is willing to listen." Brennan arrived by helicopter 30 minutes after Okonkwo's call, Hayes at his side, and a growing certainty in his gut that this operation had been wrong from the beginning. He stepped out into the clearing, where Charlie team held position around a woman who stood with her hands visible and her expression calm, despite being surrounded by armed operators. This was Kira Vance, not the dangerous terrorist from Paulson's briefing, not the desperate fugitive he had been hunting. A woman who looked exactly like what she claimed to be, a protector who had been forced into confrontation by people who should have known better. Lieutenant Hayes had spent the flight reviewing every piece of documentation he could access about the mission. No federal warrant, no actual charges, no evidence beyond Paulson's word that Kira Vance represented any threat to anyone. What he had found instead was a pattern. 3 years ago, an FBI analyst named Mira Chun had disappeared after filing an internal complaint about evidence tampering in a domestic violence case. The case involved Gregory Paulson, the director's nephew, accused of nearly killing his girlfriend. The evidence had vanished. The complaint had been buried, and Mira Chun had run for her life when it became clear that the FBI itself would not protect her from a director's family member. "Sir," Hayes said quietly as they approached the clearing, "I need to show you something before you talk to her." He handed Brennan a tablet displaying the files he had compiled. Marcus Paulson's nephew was accused of attempted murder in 2021. The key witness was an FBI analyst who disappeared before trial. That analyst matches the description of someone Vance claims to be protecting. This is not counterterrorism. This is a federal official using military assets to hunt down a witness who can destroy his family. Brennan read the files with hands that wanted to shake from anger he forced himself to contain. 24 men deployed, lives risked, federal resources committed, all to help a corrupt director cover up his nephew's crimes. He looked up at Kira Vance, standing 50 yards away, and saw not an enemy, but a mirror of his own sister. Emily had run from an abusive partner 3 years ago. Emily had disappeared into Alaska looking for safety. Emily had never been found, and now he was participating in the exact kind of hunt that might have ended her life. He walked forward alone, waving Hayes and the others to hold position. Kira watched him approach with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little, but she did not run or fight. She waited with the patience of someone who understood that this moment had been inevitable from the first helicopter crossing into her airspace. "Colonel Brennan," she said when he stopped 10 feet away, "your operators have been asking questions." "Good. Questions are how we get to truth. So let me ask you one. Do you know what happened to your sister Emily?" Brennan felt the words hit like a physical blow. "How do you know about Emily? How do you know anything about my family?" "Because she came through here 3 years ago," Kira said quietly, "running from a man named Marcus Delacroix, who put her in the hospital twice before she finally escaped. She made it to Fairbanks, bought supplies, headed into the wilderness looking for a place to disappear. I found her 6 weeks later, or what was left of her." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Brennan heard his own voice from very far away. "What do you mean, what was left of her?" Kira gestured toward the tree line. "There's a place 2 miles north where the permafrost creates a natural shelf. Beautiful spot, overlooks a valley where caribou migrate every spring. Your sister was there. She had built a shelter, had supplies, was doing everything right. But she got sick. Pneumonia probably, maybe influenza. Alone in the wilderness with no medical care, she did not stand a chance. I found her body in March of 2023. I buried her properly, and I have kept her grave tended ever since." Brennan could not breathe. Could not think. Could only process the information that his sister, the woman he had been searching for through every operation in Alaska, had been dead for 3 years and resting in a grave maintained by the stranger he had been sent to capture. Why did you not report it? Why did you not tell anyone? Because she asked me not to, Kira said. She left a journal. I read it after I buried her. She wrote about Delacroix, about how he had connections at the FBI through his uncle, about how she knew that even in death he would find a way to claim her if her body was discovered. She wanted to stay lost. So I honored that wish. I kept her secret, and I made sure that every woman who came after her, every survivor who ran into this wilderness looking for safety, would have what she did not. Protection, shelter, a chance to live. She pulled something from her jacket pocket and held it out. Emily's journal, worn and water-stained but intact. Brennan took it with shaking hands and opened to a random page. His sister's handwriting, unmistakable, filled the pages with words that cut like knives. If I die out here, it is still better than going back. At least the cold is honest about what it will take from me. At least the wilderness does not pretend to love me while breaking my bones. Hayes had moved closer during the exchange, reading over Brennan's shoulder. Sir, he said carefully, Marcus Delacroix is Director Paulson's nephew-in-law, married to his niece. The family connection runs through both sides. If Emily was running from him, and if Mira-chan was investigating him, then Paulson has been using his position to protect an abuser for years. Brennan closed the journal and looked at Kira with new understanding. You're not a terrorist. You are a witness. You can testify about Emily, about what happened to her, about Paulson's nephew's history of violence. That is why he wants you dead. Not because you're dangerous to national security, but because you're dangerous to his family. Kira nodded, and Mira can testify about the evidence tampering, about how the FBI buried the case against Gregory Paulson. Between the two of us, we could destroy both Paulsons and everyone who helped them, but only if we survive long enough to tell the story. Your mission was not capture, Colonel. It was elimination. Paulson gave you authorization for lethal force because he wants every witness dead and buried where no one will find them. Okonkwo spoke up from her position with Charlie Team. Sir, if this is true, we have been acting as accomplices to obstruction of justice. Everything we have done in the last 3 days has been in service of covering up domestic violence and attempted murder. We need to abort this operation immediately and report to proper authorities. Brennan wanted to agree, wanted to pull his teams out, file reports, let the system handle it. But he had served long enough to know that the system was exactly what Paulson controlled. The man had manipulated military deployment authorization, had fabricated intelligence briefings, had convinced multiple agencies that a domestic violence survivor was a terrorist threat. Reporting through channels would give Paulson time to cover his tracks, destroy evidence, maybe even eliminate witnesses before anyone could act. No, Brennan said slowly. We do not abort. We pivot. Vance, how many women are you protecting? 17 people total, Kira said. 11 women, 6 children, all survivors, all with stories like Emily's and Myra's, all terrified that the men who hurt them will find them. And if I guarantee their safety, if I use my authority to protect them instead of threaten them, will you work with me to bring down Paulson? Kira studied him for a long moment, weighing trust that had been broken too many times before. What exactly are you proposing? I am proposing we document everything, Brennan said. Your testimony about Emily, Myra's testimony about the evidence tampering, medical records from the survivors, physical evidence of Paulson's corruption. We compile it into a package so comprehensive that when we release it, he cannot bury it. And then we send it simultaneously to Justice Department, Inspector General, Congressional Oversight, and the media. We burn down his entire operation before he realizes what is happening. Hayes was nodding enthusiastically. I can coordinate secure documentation, sir. Encrypted files, multiple redundant copies, release triggers that activate if we are compromised. Standard whistleblower protection protocols, but military grade. Kira looked at the operators surrounding her, at the colonel who had just learned his sister was dead, at the lieutenant who had been questioning this mission from the beginning. She saw doubt transforming into determination, saw hunters becoming protectors, saw the possibility that maybe, finally, the system could work the way it was supposed to. "All right," she said, "I will take you to the sanctuary. You can meet the survivors, hear their stories, understand exactly what Paulson has been trying to destroy." "But Colonel, if this is a trick, if you betray these women after I let you in, what I did to your teams in the woods will look like kindness compared to what comes next." Brennan met her eyes directly. "I just found out my sister is dead because the system failed her. I'm not letting it fail anyone else. You have my word as an officer and as Emily's brother. These women will be protected, and Paulson will answer for every crime he has committed." Kira extended her hand. Brennan shook it, and in that moment the mission changed completely. They were no longer hunter and prey. They were allies against corruption that had hidden behind federal authority for too long. Hayes immediately began coordinating with his teams, pulling them into defensive positions around the sanctuary location instead of assault positions. Okonkwo volunteered Charlie Team to establish perimeter security. The operators who had spent 3 days trying to capture Kira Vance were now preparing to defend the people she protected. But as Brennan helped coordinate the defensive preparations, his satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. Director Paulson, demanding status update, demanding confirmation of target neutralization, demanding results that Brennan was not going to provide. He stared at the message and made the decision that would determine whether 17 people lived or died in the next 48 hours. He typed a careful response. "Target contained. Preparing final extraction. Will deliver personally to your location within 72 hours. It was a lie that bought time. Time to document. Time to prepare. Time to ensure that when the truth came out, it would be loud enough that even an FBI director could not silence it." The sanctuary looked nothing like what Brennan expected. Not a desperate camp of frightened refugees, but a functioning community built with care and intention. 7 cabins arranged in a protective semicircle. A central structure that served as medical clinic and gathering space. Gardens covered for winter, but clearly productive during growing season. Solar panels camouflaged among the trees. A water filtration system drawing from the stream. This was not hiding. This was living. These women had not simply run from danger. They had built something worth protecting. Mirachin met them at the canyon entrance with a rifle across her shoulders and wariness in her eyes that only partially relaxed when she saw Kira walking freely beside the colonel. "You brought them here," she said flatly. "You brought armed federal operators to the one place we were supposed to be safe." Kira touched her arm gently. "They know the truth now. Brennan's sister was Emily, the woman we buried on the northern ridge. He has as much reason to destroy Paulson as we do. Maybe more." Mira studied Brennan with the analytical precision of someone trained to read people for deception. She had spent 12 years as an FBI analyst before Gregory Paulson's violence and Marcus Paulson's corruption forced her into this wilderness. She knew how institutions protected themselves, how authority figures made promises they never intended to keep. "Your sister ran from Gregory Paulson," she said to Brennan. "The same man who put me in the hospital 3 times before I gathered the courage to investigate him. The same man whose uncle used FBI resources to bury every piece of evidence I compiled. Why should I trust that you are any different from the system that failed both of us?" "Because I did not know," Brennan said quietly. "I did not know my sister was dead. Did not know she was running for Paulson's nephew. Did not know that the mission I was executing was designed to eliminate witnesses to federal crimes. But I know now, and I'm choosing to do something about it before anyone else dies the way Emily did." Mira held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, you want to understand what you were sent to destroy? Come meet the women Paulson wants dead." She led them deeper into the sanctuary where survivors emerged from cabins with expressions ranging from terror to defiance. Brennan counted 17 people exactly as Kira had said. Women aged from early 20s to mid-50s. Children from toddler age to early teens. Every face, carrying the marks of trauma, survived if not yet healed. A woman in her 30s approached. moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body remembered violence even when the mind tried to forget. "My name is Sarah Kovacs," she said. "2 years ago, my husband broke my jaw in 3 places because dinner was cold. He was a police captain. When I tried to press charges, his department closed ranks. When I filed for divorce, he got custody of our children because he convinced the judge I was mentally unstable. When I ran, he used law enforcement databases to track me across 4 states. Kira found me in Anchorage, half dead from exposure and suicide attempt. She brought me here, taught me to survive, gave me a reason to keep living. And now you are telling me federal agents want to destroy this place?" Hayes, who had been documenting everything on encrypted tablet, looked up with visible anger. "Ma'am, the federal agents were lied to. We were told we were hunting a terrorist. We were not told we were being used to eliminate domestic violence survivors. That changes everything." Another woman stepped forward, younger, with scars visible on her neck and arms. "Kayla Mendez," she said. "My boyfriend was a DEA agent who used his access to controlled substances to keep me drugged and compliant for 3 years. When I got clean and tried to leave, he had me arrested on possession charges using drugs he planted. I spent 6 months in jail before a public defender finally got the charges dismissed. But by then he had destroyed my reputation, my career, my credibility. Nobody would believe me when I said a federal agent was my abuser. Mira found me sleeping in my car outside Fairbanks. She brought me here. For the first time in 4 years, I feel safe." Brennan listened to story after story, each one worse than the last. A teacher whose husband was a federal prosecutor who used his legal knowledge to trap her in a marriage she could not escape. A nurse whose partner was a corrections officer who threatened to have her arrested if she left. A social worker whose abuser was a city councilman who controlled the very agencies meant to protect her. Every woman had run because the system had failed. Every woman had found sanctuary here because Kira and Mira had built something the system could not. The children stayed close to their mothers, watching the armed operators with fear that made Brennan's chest tight. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, clutched a stuffed rabbit and asked her mother in a whisper that carried clearly in the mountain air, "Are the bad men here to take us back?" Her mother knelt and held her close, whispering reassurances that Brennan knew rang hollow when 17 people faced down 24 armed operators. He knelt too, making himself less threatening, meeting the child at eye level. "Sweetheart, we are not here to take anyone anywhere. We were lied to about why we came. But now we know the truth. And I promise you, we're going to make sure you and your mom stay safe. Do you believe me?" The girl studied him with eyes too old for her face, processing trust issues that no 6-year-old should carry. She looked at her mother, who nodded slowly, then looked back at Brennan. "My daddy hurt Mommy a lot. He said nobody would believe her because he is important. Are you more important than him?" Brennan felt something crack in his chest. "I do not know if I'm more important," he said honestly, "but I'm going to try harder. And I'm going to make sure the people who hurt your mom face consequences. That is a promise." Kira watched the exchange and saw the moment Brennan fully committed. Saw the colonel transform from someone following orders to someone protecting the innocent. She caught Myra's eye and saw the same recognition. They had allies now. Real ones. People willing to risk careers and possibly lives to do what was right instead of what was easy. "Colonel," Kira said, "you need to see something else. Something that proves Paulson knew exactly what he was doing when he sent you here." She led Brennan, Hayes, and Okonkwo to the medical clinic where Tomas Reyes, the retired combat medic, maintained detailed records of every survivor's injuries. Photographs documenting abuse. Medical reports showing patterns of violence. Sworn statements describing crimes committed by people with badges and authority. Evidence that should have sent dozens of powerful men to prison, but had instead been buried or ignored because the victims had no credibility against their abusers' positions. "This is what Paulson wants destroyed," Mira said, gesturing to filing cabinets full of documentation. "This is why he fabricated a terrorism threat. Because if this evidence ever reaches the right people, it does not just destroy Gregory Paulson. It exposes systematic failures across law enforcement, judiciary, federal agencies. It proves that domestic violence survivors cannot trust the institutions meant to protect them when their abusers have power and connections. Hayes was photographing everything, creating encrypted backups, building the comprehensive package Brennan had promised. "Sir," he said quietly, "this is enough to trigger multiple federal investigations. Inspector General, Congressional Oversight, Civil Rights Division, possibly even RICO charges if we can prove conspiracy. But we need more than documentation. We need testimony from someone with direct knowledge of Paulson's corruption." "That would be me," Mira said. "I have emails, recordings, internal FBI memos showing Marcus Paulson personally buried evidence against his nephew. I have documentation of 3 other cases where he interfered in investigations involving family members or political allies. I have everything needed to destroy him. I just need to survive long enough to deliver it." Brennan's satellite phone buzzed again. Another message from Paulson, this one more insistent. "Need confirmation of target status. Upload imagery showing neutralization. Do not make me doubt your commitment to mission completion." The threat was clear. Paulson was getting suspicious. The 72-hour window Brennan had bought was shrinking. Sir Okonkwo said, reading over his shoulder, "He's going to send backup if he thinks we're compromised. Probably FBI tactical team with orders to clean up loose ends. That includes us if we are protecting witnesses instead of eliminating them." Brennan made a decision that went against every chain of command instinct trained into him over 20 years. He typed a response designed to buy maximum time while revealing minimum information. Target and associated witnesses contained in secure location. Preparing comprehensive evidence package per your previous guidance on ensuring no loose ends. Will deliver personally with full documentation. Require 72 hours to ensure operation completion meets your specifications. It was deliberately vague, could be interpreted as either compliance or threat, bought time while maintaining deniability. Kira read the message and understood immediately what Brennan was doing. Playing both sides. Keeping Paulson believing the mission was proceeding while actually building the case that would destroy him. Dangerous game, Colonel. If he figures out you flipped, he will send people to kill all of us. Then we work fast, Brennan replied. Hayes, how long to compile everything into a release package? 48 hours if we work around the clock, Hayes said. Full documentation, encrypted redundancy, release triggers to media and oversight agencies simultaneously. But sir, we need to get these people out of here before Paulson realizes what is happening. This sanctuary is defensible against random discovery, but not against a dedicated federal assault. Kira shook her head. These women spent years running. I'm not asking them to run again. We defend this ground. We make our stand here where they have built lives worth protecting. And we make damn sure that when the fight comes, the whole world is watching. Mira smiled, fierce and determined. She looked at the assembled operators who had transformed from hunters to guardians. We have military training, tactical expertise, and defensive terrain. More importantly, we have the truth on our side. Paulson can send tactical teams, helicopters, whatever resources he controls. But he cannot change the fact that he is a corrupt official using federal power to eliminate witnesses. And when this goes public, all the tactical superiority in the world will not save him from justice. Brennan looked around the sanctuary at women who had survived the worst humanity could offer, at children who deserved safety they had never known, at operators who had chosen conscience over orders. He thought about Emily buried on a ridge 2 miles north, dead because the system had failed her when she needed it most. All right, he said, we make our stand here. We document everything. And in 48 hours, we release evidence that burns Marcus Paulson's world to the ground. After that, he can send every tactical team in the FBI. It will not matter. The truth will already be out there where he cannot bury it. The 48 hours became a race against time that everyone felt in their bones. Hayes worked through the first night compiling documentation, cross-referencing evidence, building a case so comprehensive that no amount of federal authority could bury it. Survivor testimonies. Medical photographs showing injuries consistent with sustained abuse. FBI internal communications that Mira had secretly copied before fleeing. Financial records showing Gregory Paulson's payments to witnesses who later recanted. Phone logs proving Marcus Paulson had personally contacted local police departments to discourage domestic violence investigations. Every piece meticulously organized, encrypted, and replicated across 7 secure servers with deadman switches that would trigger automatic release if compromised. Brennan spent those hours doing something he had not done since Afghanistan. He wrote letters. One to his commanding officer explaining exactly why he had chosen to disobey orders. One to the inspector general detailing Paulson's corruption. One to his sister Emily, words he would never send but needed to say, apologies for failing to find her in time, and promises that her death would mean something. He sealed them in waterproof packets and gave them to Kira with instructions to ensure they reached their destinations if he did not survive what was coming. Kira and her team prepared the sanctuary for siege. They reinforced defensive positions using terrain advantages she had mapped over 6 years. Created overlapping fields of fire that would force any assault team into kill zones without clean approaches. Stockpiled ammunition, medical supplies, and enough food to sustain 17 survivors and 24 operators for 2 weeks if necessary. Most importantly, they established evacuation routes for the children, hidden trails that led to secondary cache points where helicopters could extract non-combatants if the sanctuary fell. Mira worked with the survivors to record video testimonies, each woman speaking directly to camera about abuse suffered and systems that failed them. Sarah Kovacs described her police captain husband using department databases to track her movements. Kayla Mendez explained how a DEA agent used controlled substances to keep her dependent and silent. Others told stories of judges who dismissed restraining orders, prosecutors who refused to file charges, social workers who returned children to homes where violence was documented. Every testimony was damning. Every story revealed institutional complicity in allowing powerful men to abuse with impunity. On the second morning, Brennan's satellite phone lit up with an incoming call. Not a text message, a direct call from Marcus Paulson, which meant the director had moved past suspicion into active concern. Brennan answered with careful neutrality in his voice. Director Paulson. The voice that came back was cold enough to freeze blood. Colonel, I have been reviewing your status reports, and I am concerned about timeline slippage. You told me 72 hours. We are now at 48, with no confirmation of target neutralization. I need proof of mission completion, or I need you to explain why I should not assume you have been compromised. Brennan had prepared for this call, had rehearsed his response to buy maximum time while revealing minimum truth. Sir, the target situation is more complex than initial briefing indicated. She has established a fortified position with multiple civilians present. We are working to extract her without collateral casualties that would create public relations complications. There was a pause that stretched too long. Then Paulson's voice, sharper now, cutting through the diplomatic language. What civilians? The briefing indicated a lone terrorist operating in isolation. Intelligence was incomplete, sir, Brennan said, choosing words carefully. Target has been providing sanctuary to approximately 17 individuals who were not disclosed in operational planning. We are working to verify their status and ensure compliant handling per federal guidelines. Another pause. Brennan could almost hear Paulson calculating, wondering how much the colonel knew, how deep the compromise went. Describe these individuals, Paulson ordered. Ages, demographics, apparent relationship to target. Brennan met Kira's eyes across the command tent, where she listened to every word. He made a choice that ended any possibility of deniability. Mostly women and children, Director. Approximately 11 adult females, 6 minors. Initial interviews suggest they are domestic violence survivors who fled situations where local law enforcement and federal agencies failed to provide adequate protection. Several have indicated their abusers held positions of authority in law enforcement or government. This significantly complicates the counterterrorism narrative we were briefed on. The silence that followed was absolute. When Paulson spoke again, his voice carried barely controlled rage. Colonel Brennan, you are relieved of command effective immediately. Extract your personnel from that location and return to base. I am dispatching FBI tactical team to handle target acquisition. You're not to interfere with their operations. You're not to communicate with target or associated individuals. You're not to discuss this mission with anyone outside authorized chain of command. Do you understand these orders? Brennan smiled without humor. I understand them perfectly, sir, but I am not going to follow them, because those orders are not about national security. They are about eliminating witnesses to federal crimes. And I have enough evidence of your corruption to ensure that when this goes public, you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Hayes had been waiting for that signal. The moment Brennan openly defied Paulson, he triggered the release sequence. 7 different packages launched simultaneously to Department of Justice, FBI Inspector General, Congressional Oversight Committees, New York Times, Washington Post, Associated Press, and 3 network news divisions. Each package contained complete documentation of Paulson's interference in domestic violence cases involving his nephew. Each included survivor testimonies, medical evidence, financial records, and internal FBI communications showing deliberate obstruction of justice. Each was time-stamped and encrypted to prevent alteration. Within minutes, hundreds of copies were propagating across secure servers that Paulson could not touch. You just made the biggest mistake of your career, Paulson said, his voice shaking with fury. I will bury you. I will destroy everyone who helped you. And when my tactical team finishes with that sanctuary, there will not be enough evidence left to fill a shoebox. Actually, Brennan replied calmly, you just made the biggest mistake of yours. Because while you were threatening me, my team released everything to media and oversight agencies. By this time tomorrow, every news network in America will be running stories about an FBI director who used federal resources to protect his wife-beating nephew and eliminate witnesses. Your career is over. Your nephew's freedom is over. And the 17 women you tried to kill are about to become the most protected witnesses in federal custody. He ended the call and looked at the assembled group. Hayes nodding confirmation that all packages had deployed successfully. Kira, gripping her rifle with knuckles white, but eyes clear. Mira holding a tablet, showing news alerts already breaking about FBI corruption investigation. Okonkwo and her team checking weapons with the grim determination of people preparing for a fight they knew was coming. How long until Paulson's tactical team arrives? Kira asked. Brennan checked his tactical display. He has access to FBI hostage rescue team based in Anchorage. They can be airborne in 30 minutes, here in 90. Call it 2 hours before we are under assault by approximately 20 operators with federal authority and orders to eliminate all witnesses. Then we have 2 hours to prepare, Mira said. She looked at the survivors gathered in the central building, women who had spent years running and were now preparing to make a stand. We evacuate the children first. Sarah, you take them to the northern cache point with Delta Team as escort. The rest of us hold here and make sure Paulson's people understand that attacking domestic violence survivors on national television is not a good career move. One of the survivors, a woman named Jennifer who had been silent through most of the preparation, spoke up with unexpected steel in her voice. No more running. No more hiding. I spent 3 years terrified that my husband would find me. Terrified that his badge and his friends in the department would let him hurt me with impunity. I am done being afraid. If federal agents want to attack women who escaped abuse, let them do it on camera where the whole world can see exactly who the real criminals are. Kira looked at Brennan. You understand what is about to happen? Paulson is going to send people with legal authority and federal backing. They will have orders to eliminate witnesses. They will not care about optics or public perception until it is too late. This gets bloody, and everyone here could die. Brennan nodded slowly. I understand. But I also understand that my sister died alone and afraid because nobody stood up for her. I am not letting that happen again. We hold this ground. We protect these people. And we make damn sure that when the shooting stops, the truth is so loud that even the FBI cannot silence it. Hayes had been monitoring news feeds on his tablet. Sir, you need to see this. He held up the screen, showing breaking news alerts. FBI director under investigation for obstruction of justice. Federal whistleblower claims corruption in domestic violence cases. Multiple outlets report systematic cover-up of abuse by law enforcement officials. The story was breaking exactly as planned, spreading faster than Paulson could contain it. But with the exposure came escalation. Brennan's tactical display lit up with new signals. 3 helicopters airborne from Anchorage. Ground vehicles moving from staging areas. Radio chatter indicating 23 FBI operators deploying with full tactical gear and authorization for deadly force. Paulson was not trying to hide anymore. He was going all in on eliminating witnesses before their testimony could be delivered in court. Kira climbed to the highest point overlooking the sanctuary entrance and glassed the approaching force through binoculars. 3 UH-60 Blackhawks with full tactical teams. Ground support vehicles carrying additional operators and heavy weapons. This was not an arrest operation. This was an extermination mission disguised as law enforcement. She keyed her radio to the frequency that connected all defenders. "They're coming in hot," she said calmly. 20-plus operators, federal authority, orders to eliminate all witnesses. Rules of engagement are simple. Protect the innocent. Document everything. And make sure that every bullet they fire is captured on camera so the world knows exactly who started this fight. Brennan positioned his operators in defensive formations that maximize cover while maintaining camera angles. Hayes had set up multiple live streaming cameras feeding encrypted channels to media outlets. Everything that happened in the next hour would be recorded, broadcast, and impossible to deny. The helicopters appeared over the ridge line, black against blue sky, descending toward landing zones that Kira had already targeted with carefully prepared obstacles. "This is it," Mira said quietly, standing beside Kira with her rifle ready and her phone recording everything. "This is where we find out if truth actually matters more than power." Kira chambered around and took aim at the lead helicopter's approach vector. "It always matters," she replied. "Sometimes you just have to fight to make people remember that." The helicopters descended, tactical teams prepared to deploy, and the sanctuary waited with weapons ready and cameras rolling to document exactly what happened when corrupt authority met people who had nothing left to lose except their dignity and their truth. The first helicopter touched down 200 yards from the sanctuary perimeter and immediately encountered the first of Kira's prepared obstacles. The landing zone she had predicted they would use had been seeded with caltrops fashioned from welded nails, invisible under fresh snow until rotor wash scattered the white powder and revealed a field of tire-shredding spikes. The pilot aborted landing at the last second, pulling up hard enough that 2 operators in the bay nearly fell out. The other 2 helicopters diverted to alternate zones, spreading the assault force across wider terrain exactly as Kira had planned. Hayes had 6 cameras running, feeding live to news networks that were already breaking into regular programming with alerts about federal agents assaulting domestic violence sanctuary. The optics were devastating from the first moment. Heavily armed tactical teams deploying against a remote settlement where the only visible movement was women and children being escorted to safety by military personnel, clearly acting as protectors rather than aggressors. Every news anchor who picked up the feed immediately understood they were watching something unprecedented. Federal law enforcement attacking the very people they were sworn to protect. The FBI tactical commander, a man named Supervisory Special Agent Cordell, established command position and immediately tried to assert authority through bullhorn announcement. "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation executing lawful orders. All persons in the settlement are ordered to surrender immediately. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have 5 minutes to comply." Brennan keyed his own loudspeaker, his voice carrying across the canyon with a weight of command authority that came from 2 decades of military service. "This is Colonel Wade Brennan, United States Army. The settlement you're threatening contains 17 domestic violence survivors and 6 children under federal whistleblower protection. Your orders originated from a corrupt official currently under investigation for obstruction of justice. Fire 1 round at these people, and you'll be prosecuted for assault on protected witnesses. Stand down immediately. Cordell hesitated, clearly receiving conflicting information through his command channel. His orders came directly from Director Paulson with authorization from the highest levels. But Brennan's announcement, broadcast live to millions of viewers, had just reframed the entire operation from law enforcement to potential war crime. He keyed his radio to Paulson, voice tight with stress. "Sir, we have media coverage, live cameras, military personnel protecting civilians. This does not match the briefing parameters. Recommend we pull back and reassess." Paulson's response came through loud enough that operators standing near Cordell could hear it clearly. "I do not care about media coverage. I do not care about optics. You have your orders. Execute them, or I will find someone who will." Cordell looked at his team, then at the sanctuary where women held children close while armed operators formed defensive perimeter. He had served 23 years in the FBI, survived dozens of tactical operations, earned commendations for judgment under pressure. He was being ordered to assault domestic violence survivors on live television by a director whose corruption was already trending on every social media platform. He made the decision that would save lives and end his career. "Team leaders, stand down. We are not engaging. Return to helicopters for extraction." Paulson's voice erupted through the radio with incoherent rage. "Cordell, you are relieved. Team 2 leader, you have operational command. Execute the assault immediately or face court-martial." Team 2 leader, Special Agent Marcus Vega, the same Sergeant Vega who had led Alpha Team and been the first to suspect Kira's capabilities, stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, we are federal law enforcement, not executioners. These are American citizens exercising their constitutional rights. I will not order my team to fire on them regardless of who gives that order." One by one, the other team leaders echoed the refusal. Tactical operators who had been prepared to follow orders now faced with the reality that those orders violated every principle they had sworn to uphold. The assault force that should have overwhelmed the sanctuary through superior numbers and equipment was fracturing as individual operators chose conscience over compliance. But Paulson had planned for this possibility. Among the FBI tactical team were 4 operators who owed their careers to the director, who had been promoted beyond their abilities through his patronage, who knew that their futures depended on his continued power. Special Agent Drake, a man with dead eyes and a service record that showed excessive force complaints in every assignment, took command of these 4 and moved toward the sanctuary perimeter without authorization from Cordell or anyone else. Kira saw them coming through her scope. 5 men moving with purpose, weapons raised, advancing on the central building where survivors had gathered. She keyed her radio to Brennan. "We have 5 breaking off from main force. They're going for the civilians. I can stop them, but it means shooting federal agents on camera." Brennan's response was immediate. "You are authorized to defend those people by any means necessary. I take full responsibility." Kira settled her breathing and took aim at Drake's leading foot. The shot was precise, a 308 round that hit dirt 6 inches ahead of his advance, kicking up frozen earth in a spray that made him dive for cover. "Warning shot," she announced over loudspeaker. "The next one is not a warning. Turn around and rejoin your team, or I start putting rounds through equipment until you have no choice but to withdraw." Drake responded by firing a burst from his rifle toward Kira's position. The rounds impacted 20 feet low, poorly aimed suppression fire meant to force her into cover. Instead, Kira adjusted her aim and fired again. This shot took Drake's radio clean off his tactical vest, the precision so perfect that it left him unharmed but completely cut off from command. She shifted targets and destroyed Team 2's communications equipment with equal accuracy. Then their night vision mounts. Then the optics on their rifles. Every shot demonstrating capability that was unmistakably military trained. Every impact documented on camera every round clearly defensive rather than aggressive. Hayes was narrating for the live feed, his voice carrying to news anchors who were broadcasting to millions. What you're seeing is a single defensive shooter neutralizing FBI tactical equipment with precision that prevents casualties while defending domestic violence survivors. This is not terrorism. This is protection of the innocent against corrupt authority. The remaining FBI operators watched Drake's unsanctioned assault fall apart under Kira's methodical equipment destruction. Cordell used the chaos to reassert control, ordering his teams to withdraw to helicopter extraction points. "We are pulling back," he announced. "This operation is compromised and potentially illegal. All teams return to base for debrief and legal review." But Drake was not done. Isolated from his team, his radio destroyed, his tactical advantage stripped away, he made the decision that transformed him from misguided operator to attempted murderer. He pulled his sidearm and charged the central building where survivors watched through windows, clearly intending to take hostages or worse. Kira saw it happening and knew she was out of time for warning shots. She adjusted her aim to Drake's center mass and prepared to fire the shot that would end his life and potentially her freedom. The shot came from a different direction. Corporal Vega, the operator Kira had saved from the avalanche, had positioned himself between Drake and the survivors. His rifle barked once, and Drake went down with a leg wound that was incapacitating but survivable. Vega advanced quickly, kicked Drake's weapon away, and zip-tied his hands with movements that spoke to extensive training and zero hesitation. "Subject secured," he announced calmly, requesting immediate medical evacuation for agent who violated rules of engagement and endangered civilians. The standoff was over. The FBI tactical team withdrew under Cordell's command, taking Drake with them for medical treatment and probable prosecution. Paulson's assault had failed completely, broadcast live to an audience that grew larger every minute as news networks picked up the story. The sanctuary stood intact. The survivors were safe, and the entire world had watched federal agents refuse to follow corrupt orders. Brennan walked out to meet Cordell at the extraction point, two commanders acknowledging the impossible situation they had both navigated. "You made the right call," Brennan said. "Takes courage to disobey direct orders from a director." Cordell looked tired, like a man who knew his career was over but could live with the reason why. "Those were not lawful orders," he replied. "I have been an agent for 23 years. I know the difference between justice and revenge. What Paulson wanted here was revenge." He extended his hand. "For what it is worth, Colonel, those women are lucky you were the one who found them instead of someone who would have followed orders blindly." They shook, two professionals who had chosen integrity over obedience. The helicopters lifted off, leaving behind only the defenders and the survivors they had protected. Kira descended from her position and found Vega waiting with an expression that mixed relief and residual adrenaline. "Thank you," she said simply, "for choosing the right side." Vega smiled, tired but genuine. "You saved my life in that avalanche when you could have let me die. Figured I owed you one. Besides, my daughter is 7 years old, same age as some of those kids in there. I joined the FBI to protect people like them, not threaten them." Paulson can go to hell. Inside the sanctuary, survivors emerged from shelter to find the threat past, and their stories now national news. Sarah Kovacs held her daughter while watching news coverage on Myra's tablet, tears streaming down her face. "We are not hiding anymore," she whispered. "The whole country knows what we survived, knows why we ran, knows that the system failed us. Maybe now things change." Mira stood beside Brennan, watching the news cycle accelerate, watching Paulson's carefully constructed corruption collapse under the weight of evidence that could not be buried. Multiple networks were calling for his resignation. Congressional leaders were demanding investigations. The Attorney General had announced a special prosecutor. "It is over," she said. "Paulson is finished. His nephew will face charges. The women who came here for safety can finally stop running." But Brennan was checking his tactical display where new signals were appearing. Ground vehicles approaching from the east. Not FBI, not military. Private security contractors moving fast toward the sanctuary with no official authorization and no legal standing. He felt ice form in his stomach. "It is not over yet," he said quietly. "Paulson has one more move, and this one is going to be uglier than anything that came before." The private contractors arrived in unmarked SUVs with weapons that had no business being in civilian hands. Brennan counted 12 operators moving with military precision that suggested recent combat experience, possibly former special operations personnel who had transitioned to security work where moral flexibility paid better than government service. These were not federal agents bound by rules of engagement and public accountability. These were mercenaries hired to do what Paulson's FBI team had refused: eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence before it could be used in court. Kira watched them deploy through her scope and recognized the difference immediately. The FBI had moved with the hesitation of people who knew cameras were watching. These contractors moved like people who did not care about cameras, about witnesses, about consequences. They were here to kill everyone in the sanctuary and probably Brennan's team as well. Clean sweep. No survivors. No testimony. Just bodies that Paulson could spin as tragic outcome of domestic terrorists attacking federal personnel. "Colonel," Kira said calmly into her radio, "these are not law enforcement. These are professional killers. Rules of engagement need to shift accordingly, or we are all dead in the next 10 minutes." Brennan had reached the same conclusion. He keyed the command frequency that connected all his operators. "All teams, we have hostile contractors approaching with lethal intent. You are authorized to use deadly force in defense of yourselves and protected civilians. This is no longer an arrest situation. This is combat. Engage on my mark." The contractors opened fire first, heavy automatic weapons tearing into the defensive positions with suppression fire designed to pin defenders while assault elements maneuvered. They were good, moving in coordinated teams with overlapping fields of fire and tactical discipline that spoke to extensive training. But they were attacking uphill into prepared defensive positions held by people who had spent 3 days fortifying terrain that already favored the defender. And they were doing it against Kira Vance on ground she had mastered over 6 years of survival. Kira's first shot took the lead contractor's weapon out of his hands, the bullet striking the receiver and rendering the rifle useless without touching the operator. Her second shot destroyed the communications backpack on their tactical coordinator. Her third shot shattered the windshield of the lead SUV, making it unusable for extraction. She was not trying to kill. Not yet. She was demonstrating capability, showing them that continuing the assault meant accepting casualties they had not anticipated. But the contractors were committed or too well paid to care about risk. They pushed forward, using smoke grenades to obscure their advance, moving toward the central building where survivors had taken shelter behind reinforced walls that Tomas had spent months preparing. Hayes coordinated defensive fire from the military operators, controlled bursts that forced contractors into cover without exposing friendly positions. Okonkwo led Charlie team in a flanking maneuver that caught 3 contractors in crossfire and forced them to withdraw or be cut off entirely. Then the contractors made the tactical error that cost them the engagement. Their assault team leader, desperate to complete the mission before military reinforcements could arrive, ordered direct assault on the central building. 6 operators broke cover simultaneously, charging across open ground with the intention of breaching the entrance and neutralizing everyone inside. It was aggressive, committed, and exactly what Kira had prepared for. The prepared explosives were not lethal. Flashbangs and smoke charges buried in the snow along the approach route, triggered remotely when all 6 contractors were committed to the crossing. The detonations created chaos and disorientation without permanent injury, buying 3 critical seconds for defenders to acquire targets. Brennan's operators opened fire with precision that came from years of combat experience, shooting to wound rather than kill, dropping 4 contractors with leg shots while the other 2 retreated in confusion. Kira shifted her aim to the contractor's vehicle support, methodically destroying engines, tires, and communications equipment until retreat became impossible. They were trapped, pinned down, taking casualties, and achieving nothing except demonstrating that Paulson's desperation had reached the point of hiring killers. Every second of the engagement was being recorded by Hayes' cameras, broadcast live to news networks that were now showing split screen of FBI Director Marcus Paulson being taken into custody by DOJ agents while his hired mercenaries attacked domestic violence survivors in Alaska. The contractor commander recognized defeat when half his team was wounded and all their vehicles were disabled. He keyed his radio to whoever had hired them, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air that carried sound in unexpected ways. "This is Blackwood Team Leader. Mission abort. Target location is heavily defended by military personnel. We have multiple casualties and no viable extraction. Requesting immediate support or we surrender to federal authority." The response that came back was not support or extraction orders. It was Marcus Paulson's voice, stripped of all pretense at authority, raw with desperation and rage. "You were paid to eliminate those witnesses. You do not come back until that mission is complete, or you do not come back at all. Kill them. Kill all of them. I do not care how many of you die doing it." The contractors looked at each other with expressions that mixed shock and disgust. They had been hired for what they thought was legitimate security work, not mass murder of women and children broadcast on national television. The commander made a decision that Brennan recognized as the same choice Cordell had made an hour earlier. "Negative," he said firmly. "We are not executing civilians on your orders. Blackwood Team is standing down. We surrender to military authority on site." One by one, the contractors threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Brennan's operators moved to secure them with zip ties and medical treatment for the wounded. It was over. The assault had failed. The contractors would face prosecution for their role, but had chosen surrender over massacre. And Marcus Paulson's final desperate gambit had collapsed on live television with recordings that would guarantee his conviction on conspiracy to commit murder charges. Kira descended from her position and walked into the sanctuary where survivors were emerging from shelter with expressions that mixed relief, disbelief, and the first fragile hope that safety might actually be permanent this time. Sarah Kovacs approached with her daughter, the little girl who had asked if the bad men were there to take them back. "We are really safe now," she asked Kira. "They cannot hurt us anymore." Kira knelt to meet the child's eyes, the same way Brennan had days earlier. "You are safe," she said with absolute certainty. "The people who wanted to hurt you are going to prison. The whole country knows your story now. And everyone here, all these soldiers and agents and people with guns, they are on your side. Nobody is taking you anywhere you do not want to go ever again." The girl thought about this, processing concepts that should have been simple but had been corrupted by years of violence and fear. Then she did something that made Kira's chest tighten. She hugged her, threw small arms around Kira's neck, and held on like someone who had learned that safety was temporary and needed to be appreciated while it lasted. "Thank you for keeping us safe," she whispered. "Thank you for not running away." Kira held her and felt something crack in the armor she had built over 6 years of isolation. She had come to Alaska to hide from a world that had broken her trust, had built this sanctuary to protect others without truly connecting to them. But this child's gratitude, this moment of pure human connection, reminded her that protection without relationship was just another form of hiding. She looked up and saw Mira watching with tears on her face, saw Brennan speaking quietly with his operators about people they had defended rather than hunted, saw survivors comforting each other with the knowledge that their nightmare was finally, truly over. Hayes appeared with his tablet showing breaking news that was spreading across every network. FBI Director Marcus Paulson arrested on multiple charges. Corruption scandal exposes systematic protection of domestic violence abusers. Federal whistleblower protection extended to Alaska sanctuary survivors. Congressional hearings scheduled to investigate law enforcement failures. The story had grown beyond just Paulson's crimes to expose institutional failures that had allowed powerful abusers to operate with impunity for years. Mira read the coverage and felt weight she had carried for 3 years finally lift. Her testimony would be heard now. not buried or dismissed or threatened into silence, but heard by courts and Congress and the public. Gregory Paulson would face trial for attempted murder. Marcus Paulson would spend decades in federal prison. And 17 women who had been forced to hide in wilderness would be able to reclaim their lives without fear. Brennan received notification that military transport helicopters were inbound to evacuate survivors to federal protective custody in Anchorage. Proper custody this time, with DOJ oversight and media attention that would prevent any further attempts at intimidation or elimination. He walked to where Kira stood watching the sun set over mountains that had been her home and fortress for 6 years. "What happens to you now?" he asked. "After all this, after the trials and testimony and congressional hearings, where do you go?" Kira considered the question while watching the wolf pup she had rescued, now grown into a powerful young wolf, moving through the tree line with the confidence of an animal that understood this territory belonged to it. "I built this place to hide," she said quietly. "Spent 6 years running from the world that broke me. But maybe hiding is not what I need anymore. Maybe what I need is to help other people stop running. Turn this sanctuary into something permanent. A place where survivors can heal without having to disappear." Brennan nodded slowly. "The Army owes me significant leave time after this operation concludes. I can help with that. Building something permanent. Making sure it is done right this time." He paused, then added quietly, "Emily would have liked knowing this place exists. Would have liked knowing her death meant something." Kira touched his arm gently. "Her death meant everything, Colonel. Because you came here looking for her and found 17 other women who needed the same protection she deserved. That is not failure. That is redemption. For both of us." As darkness settled over the sanctuary, survivors and defenders gathered in the central building for the first meal where everyone was truly safe. No more watching the tree line for threats. No more wondering if today was the day their hiding ended. Just people who had survived impossible odds, sharing food and stories, and the beginning of hope that maybe, finally, the system that had failed them would be forced to change. Vega approached Kira with expression that mixed respect and curiosity. "Ma'am, I've been wondering something since that avalanche. You could have killed all of us a dozen times. Had opportunity, capability, tactical advantage. Why did you hold back? Why risk capture when you could have eliminated the threat?" Kira smiled, tired but genuine. "Because killing people who are following orders they believe are lawful is not justice, Corporal. It is just more violence. I wanted you to understand who you were really hunting. Wanted you to choose conscience over compliance. Wanted you to be the kind of agents and soldiers those survivors needed instead of the kind that failed them." She paused, then added, "And because I was you once. Good person following bad orders. When I finally understood what I was part of, I ran instead of fighting to fix it. You chose better. That is worth more than tactical victories." The night deepened and news coverage continued, spreading across time zones and social media platforms, reaching millions of people who would now know that domestic violence survivors existed, that the system failed them, that change was necessary and possible. Tomorrow would bring testimony, trials, congressional hearings, and all the machinery of justice that had been corrupted finally being forced to work correctly. But tonight, in a sanctuary built by one woman's determination to protect the innocent, 17 people slept safely for the first time in years. And that was triumph enough for anyone. 3 months after the siege, Kira stood in a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., wearing civilian clothes that felt alien after years in wilderness gear. The room was packed with media, congressional observers, and survivors who had traveled from across the country to watch Marcus Paulson face judgment for crimes he had committed from behind the shield of federal authority. The former FBI director sat at the defense table with expensive lawyers who had spent 12 weeks trying to suppress evidence that was already public, broadcast to millions, and impossible to deny. Mira Chun took the stand first, her testimony precise and devastating. She detailed 3 years of investigating Gregory Paulson for domestic violence and attempted murder. described finding evidence that proved beyond doubt he had beaten 4 different women, one so severely she lost vision in her left eye. Explained how she had compiled that evidence into a case file that should have guaranteed prosecution. Then described watching Marcus Paulson personally destroy that file, threaten her career, and eventually force her to flee for her life when she refused to let the investigation die. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she had fabricated evidence out of personal vendetta. Myra's response was calm and backed by documentation that Hayes had encrypted and distributed so thoroughly that even the best lawyers could not suppress it. I have emails showing Director Paulson ordering evidence removal. I have recordings of him threatening investigators who pursued his nephew. I have financial records showing he paid witnesses to recant testimony. This is not vendetta. This is documentation of systematic corruption by someone who believed his position made him untouchable. Sarah Kovacs testified next, describing how her husband, the police captain, had used department resources to stalk her across state lines. How restraining orders were ignored because judges played golf with her abuser. How her children were taken from her because a corrupt system believed a badge over bruises. How she had finally run to Alaska because there was nowhere else left where power could not reach her. Until Kira Vance gave her sanctuary and taught her that survival was possible even when systems failed. One by one, the survivors told their stories. 11 women describing abuse by men with authority. Describing systems that protected abusers instead of victims. Describing the moment they realized running to Wilderness was safer than trusting law enforcement, courts, or federal agencies meant to protect them. Each testimony was a knife cutting through Paulson's defense. Each story proof that his corruption enabled violence on massive scale. Brennan testified about his sister Emily, reading from her journal entries that described fleeing Marcus Delacroix and knowing that his family connections to Paulson meant she would never be safe in any city with FBI presence. He described finding her grave maintained by the woman he had been sent to kill, understanding that Paulson had manipulated him into hunting witnesses who could expose his nephew's crimes. His voice broke only once. When describing the moment, he realized his orders were designed to eliminate the same kind of survivors his sister had been. The prosecution presented the contractors who had surrendered rather than massacre civilians. They testified about being hired through intermediaries to eliminate witnesses at an Alaska location, about receiving payment from accounts eventually traced to Paulson's personal finances, about the moment they realized they were being asked to commit mass murder and chose surrender over compliance. Their commander, a former Marine named Blackwood, delivered testimony that destroyed any remaining doubt about Paulson's intent. He told us the targets were terrorists. He told us federal authority authorized lethal force. He lied, and when we refused to kill women and children, he tried to have us eliminated as loose ends. That is not law enforcement. That is organized crime hiding behind a badge. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, abuse of authority, federal corruption, witness intimidation. Marcus Paulson was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. His nephew Gregory faced separate trial for attempted murder, assault, and witness tampering, with Myra's testimony and physical evidence guaranteeing conviction that would put him away for minimum 20 years. But the real victory came in the congressional hearings that followed. Survivors testified before oversight committees about systematic failures in domestic violence response, about how power and connections allowed abusers to corrupt the institutions meant to protect victims, about the need for independent oversight, mandatory prosecution protocols, and federal protections that could not be circumvented by local authority. The hearings resulted in legislation that would reshape how domestic violence cases were handled nationwide. Kira testified last, on a cold November morning when Washington was covered in the first snow of winter. She spoke about building the sanctuary, about the 17 women who had found her or been found by her, about teaching survival to people whose trust in civilization had been destroyed by those sworn to protect them. She spoke about Emily Brennan's grave on a ridge in Alaska where caribou still migrated every spring. And she spoke about the choice she had made to save lives rather than take them, even when federal agents were hunting her with authorization to kill. The committee chairman, a senator from Alaska who had been following the case since the siege, asked the question that defined everything. Miss Vance, you could have disappeared. You had 6 years of successful concealment, resources, skills to remain hidden indefinitely. Why did you choose to fight instead of run when you knew it might cost your life? Kira considered the question while looking at the gallery where survivors sat watching, where Brennan sat in full dress uniform, where Mira held hands with Sarah, and both women waited for an answer that would explain choices neither fully understood themselves. Because running is not the same as living, Kira said finally. I spent 6 years hiding from a world that broke me, built walls between myself and everyone else, convinced myself that isolation was safety. But those women who came to the sanctuary taught me something I had forgotten. That connection is worth the risk. That protecting people you care about is worth fighting impossible odds. That sometimes the only way to heal is to stop running from the pain and turn around to face it. She paused, then added quietly, my grandfather used to say that land chooses its people just as much as people choose their land. That wilderness gives itself to those who earn it through respect and understanding. I thought he meant survival skills, tracking, hunting, all the practical knowledge. But what he really meant was belonging. That 40,000 acres of Alaska is not just where I hid. It is where I belong, where those women belong, where anyone running from violence should be able to find safety without having to disappear from the world entirely. And that is worth defending, even against federal authority, even at risk of everything. The hearing room was silent for a long moment. Then the chairman nodded slowly. Miss Vance, this committee is recommending that your sanctuary be granted federal recognition as a protected refuge for domestic violence survivors. We are also recommending that you be appointed as director with full authority to establish protocols, select staff, and determine admissions. Will you accept that responsibility? Kira felt the weight of the offer settle onto shoulders that had carried too much alone for too long. She looked at Mira, who smiled encouragement, at Brennan, who nodded respect, at the survivors who had taught her that protection meant nothing without connection. I will accept, she said, on one condition, that the refuge is not named after me, not associated with any individual, but dedicated to Emily Brennan and every woman who died running from abuse because the system failed them. Let it be a memorial that actually saves lives. The refuge was established 6 months later. Federal funding, permanente structure, medical facilities, educational programs, counseling services, everything the original sanctuary lacked but desperately needed. Kira ran it with Mira as operations director, Sarah as community coordinator, and Tomas as medical director. Brennan took extended leave from military service to help establish security protocols that protected without imprisoning, that created safety without isolation. Vega and 3 other operators who had served during the siege requested transfer to Alaska to work as security staff, bringing their skills to protecting people instead of hunting them. Okonkwo became liaison between the refuge and federal oversight agencies, ensuring that the bureaucracy served survivors instead of obstructing them. Hayes documented everything, creating training materials that were distributed to law enforcement agencies nationwide about proper response to domestic violence and the catastrophic failures that occurred when authority protected abusers. The refuge grew. Within a year, 43 women and 22 children lived there full-time. Others came for shorter stays, long enough to heal and find strength before returning to lives they had been forced to abandon. Some stayed permanently, finding in the Alaskan wilderness the peace that civilization could not provide. Every woman who arrived was taught survival skills, self-defense, and the fundamental truth that safety was something you built yourself when systems failed to provide it. Kira still climbed to Emily's grave once a month, maintaining the site she had tended for years. But now she brought survivors with her, sharing the story of a woman who had died alone so that others might understand why the refuge mattered, why their stories deserved to be heard, why survival was not weakness, but the most profound form of strength. The wolf she had rescued, now fully grown and wild, sometimes appeared on those visits, watching from the tree line before disappearing back into wilderness that was both sanctuary and home. On the first anniversary of the siege, news crews returned to film the transformation. The same canyon where tactical teams had assaulted survivors now housed a thriving community. Children who had arrived, terrified, now played in the snow with laughter that echoed off the mountains. Women who had spent years afraid to exist now built lives with purpose and dignity. Kira gave a brief interview, standing in front of the central building where a bronze plaque honored Emily Brennan and all those who had died fleeing violence. The reporter asked if she had any regrets about the choices that led to this moment. Kira thought about the question while watching Sarah teaching her daughter to track animals in fresh snow, teaching skills that built confidence and self-reliance. Watched Mira coordinating with federal oversight to expand the refuge's capacity. Watched Brennan working with new arrivals to establish security protocols that empowered rather than controlled. Watched survivors who had been broken finding ways to heal that the system had never offered them. No regrets, Kira said finally. We built something that should have existed long before women needed to run into wilderness to find safety. We proved that survivors are not weak, not damaged, not less than. They are warriors who fought impossible odds and won. And this refuge is their territory now, a place where they belong, where they are protected, where they can finally stop running and start living. That is worth every risk we took, worth every bullet fired and every stand made, because these women deserve to exist without fear. And anyone who threatens them will learn what 24 Hunters learned, that this land chooses its defenders, and its defenders do not back down. 2 years after the siege, Kira Vance stood at the entrance to the refuge, watching a new arrival step out of the helicopter with the same expression every survivor wore when they first arrived. Fear mixed with desperate hope. Exhaustion layered over determination. The look of someone who had run as far as they could and was gambling everything on the promise that this place, this sanctuary carved into Alaskan wilderness, might actually be different from every system that had failed them before. The woman's name was Rachel Torres, former assistant district attorney from Nevada, whose judge husband had beaten her for 7 years while using his position to ensure no charges would ever be filed. She had run after he put her in the hospital with broken ribs and told her that next time he would make sure the injuries were not visible enough to photograph. She had spent 6 months hiding in different cities before a victim advocate who knew about the refuge gave her the contact information that led here. Now, she stood in snow that came up to her knees, holding a small duffel bag that contained everything she owned, looking at Kira with eyes that asked the question every survivor asked. Can you really keep me safe? Or is this just another promise that will be broken? Kira walked forward slowly, giving Rachel space to process, to adjust, to understand that nobody here would rush her or force her or demand anything except her willingness to heal. Welcome to Emily Refuge, she said quietly. You're safe here. Nobody will hurt you. Nobody will find you unless you want them to. And nobody will pressure you to do anything before you are ready. Take all the time you need. Rachel's composure cracked. She dropped her bag and wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold broken pieces together through sheer force of will. I was supposed to be one of the good ones, she whispered. I prosecuted domestic violence cases, put abusers in prison, told victims they were brave for coming forward. And the whole time, I was going home to a man who did the same things to me that I was prosecuting others for. How is that possible? How did I become what I fought against? Because abusers are experts at finding the cracks in our armor, Mira said, emerging from the central building with a blanket and hot coffee. She had been where Rachel stood now, had asked the same questions, had felt the same shame that came from being unable to save yourself when you had dedicated your life to saving others. You did not become anything except human. And humans are vulnerable to people who exploit trust. But that ends now. Here, you rebuild. Here, you remember who you were before he broke you. Here, you become stronger than you ever imagined possible. Sarah appeared next with her daughter, the little girl who had asked Brennan if the bad men were there to take them back. She was 8 now, confident and smiling, holding a stuffed rabbit that had been her constant companion during those early terrified days. "Hi," the girl said brightly. "My name is Emma. I have been here for 2 years, and nobody has hurt me even once. Do you want to see my room? I have extra blankets if you get cold." Rachel looked at this child who radiated the kind of security that should have been every child's birthright, and something in her expression shifted from despair toward possibility. "Yes," she said softly. "I will like that very much." As Emma led Rachel toward the residential building, chattering about the refuge's routines and the wolf that sometimes appeared on the ridge and the gardens they would plant when winter ended, Kira felt the familiar satisfaction that came from watching transformation begin. Every survivor arrived broken. Every survivor left whole. The process took months or years and was never simple, but it worked because the refuge provided what the outside world could not. Safety without judgment, time without pressure, community without exploitation. Brennan approached from the security office where he had been coordinating with federal oversight about funding expansion. The colonel had taken permanent assignment to Alaska, officially retired from active duty to run the refuge's protection protocols. He looked more at peace than Kira had ever seen him, like a man who had finally found purpose that aligned with conscience. New arrival settled, he asked. 27th this year. We're going to need the additional housing units Hayes has been designing. Kira nodded. The refuge had grown beyond anything she had imagined that first desperate winter when she found Mira half-frozen and decided that one survivor was worth protecting. Now, they had permanent staff of 15, capacity for 60 residents, waiting list of women from across the country seeking admission. Federal funding covered operations, but demand exceeded resources every month. "We expand, or we turn people away," she said. "I did not build this place to turn anyone away who needs it." "Then we expand," Brennan agreed. "I will coordinate with Congressional Appropriations Committee." After what happened with Paulson, domestic violence funding has become politically untouchable. Nobody wants to be the senator who voted against protecting survivors. We can probably secure funding for doubling capacity within the next fiscal year. Tomas joined them, carrying medical charts and looking concerned in the way that meant he had found something that needed addressing immediately. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. 3 of our current residents are showing symptoms consistent with PTSD flashbacks triggered by the upcoming trial season. Gregory Paulson's trial starts next month, and media coverage is going to be intense. Some of our women were his victims. Others are triggered by any coverage of abuse trials. We need to implement additional psychological support before this becomes crisis. Kira had anticipated this. The refuge provided physical safety, but psychological healing required resources beyond what wilderness survival could offer. "We bring in the trauma counselors from Anchorage," she said. "Residential program, 2-week intensive, focused specifically on managing triggers around trial coverage. And we establish media blackout protocols for anyone who requests them. Nobody should be forced to relive their trauma because news cycles demand it." Mira appeared with her tablet showing the latest statistics on domestic violence nationwide. Numbers that prove the refuge was addressing symptoms but not root causes. "We are saving individual women," she said, showing graphs that tracked abuse reporting, prosecution rates, conviction percentages. But systemically, nothing has changed. Police still protect their own. Judges still give lenient sentences. Prosecutors still decline cases against powerful defendants. We built a sanctuary for people the system failed, but the system keeps failing them. At some point, we need to address that. Hayes, who had transitioned from military intelligence to advocacy work, had been developing exactly that strategy. He spread blueprints across the table showing plans that went beyond the refuge itself. "We create a network," he explained. "Refuges in every state, linked by secure communication, sharing resources and intelligence. We train law enforcement on actual domestic violence response instead of the pro-arrest policies that often make situations worse. We lobby for legislation that removes discretion for prosecutors when evidence meets threshold standards. We build the system that should have existed instead of just providing escape from the system that does exist. It was ambitious. It was necessary. And it was exactly the kind of long-term thinking that transformed individual salvation into systemic change. Kira looked at the plans and saw years of work, millions in funding requirements, political battles that would make the Paulson prosecution look simple. She also saw the faces of women who arrived broken and left whole. Saw children who learned that adults could be trusted. Saw survivors who became advocates who helped others survive. "All right," she said, "we build a network. We change the system. We make sure that what we created here becomes available everywhere so that no woman has to run to Alaskan wilderness to find safety. It will take years. It will face opposition from every power structure that benefits from keeping victims silent. But we do it anyway, because that is what this place taught us. That impossible odds are not reasons to quit. They are reasons to fight smarter." The team spent the afternoon planning expansion that would transform the refuge from isolated sanctuary into the foundation of nationwide movement. Brennan coordinated with military and law enforcement contacts who had been changed by watching the siege unfold. Mira reached out to advocacy organizations that had been trying to address domestic violence without sufficient resources. Hayes began drafting legislation that would mandate federal standards for abuse response. Tomas designed medical protocols that could be replicated across facilities. Sarah organized survivor testimonies that would drive public awareness and political pressure. As evenings settled over the refuge, Kira climbed to Emily's grave as she did every month. The bronze plaque gleamed in twilight. Emily Brennan's name joined by 43 others who had died fleeing abuse since the refuge's founding. Women whose stories had reached Kira too late, who had not survived long enough to find sanctuary. Each name was a reminder of why the work mattered, why expansion was necessary, why stopping was never an option no matter how difficult the path became. The wolf appeared on the ridge as it often did during these visits. Fully grown now, powerful and wild, living the life it chose rather than the death the trap had intended. It watched Kira for a long moment with eyes that held intelligence and something that might have been recognition. Then it howled, long and clear, a sound that echoed across the valley where survivors were gathering for evening meal, where children were playing, where community existed because people had chosen connection over isolation. Kira howled back, the call her grandfather had taught her, the sound that said, "This is my territory, and I defend what is mine." The wolf answered once more before disappearing into the wilderness that was both sanctuary and home. She stood watching where it had been and thought about the journey from that first desperate rescue to this moment where impossible had become actual. She descended to find Rachel sitting with Emma and Sarah, listening to stories about the refuge's history, about the siege where 24 hunters learned that underestimating survivors was a mistake they would not repeat. Rachel was smiling tentatively, the first crack in armor built from years of abuse, the first sign that healing was possible even when breaking seemed permanent. "How long does it take?" Rachel asked quietly, "before you stop being afraid?" Kira sat beside her and considered the question honestly. "The fear never completely goes away," she admitted, "but it changes from something that controls you into something you control. You learn to recognize it as warning system instead of prison. You learn that being afraid does not mean being helpless. And eventually, you learn that the people who made you afraid were wrong about your strength. You were never as broken as they wanted you to believe. You were just waiting for safe space to remember who you actually are." Rachel absorbed this, processing words that contradicted everything her abuser had told her about her worth and capability. "In this place," she asked, gesturing to the refuge around them, "this really works? Women really heal here?" Kira looked around at the community that had grown from one desperate choice to save a stranger into a movement that was changing how America responded to domestic violence. At Mira, coordinating with federal agencies to expand protection programs. At Brennan, teaching security protocols to staff from refuges being established in other states. At Sarah, mentoring new arrivals with wisdom earned through surviving her own nightmare. At Children, playing without fear. At Survivors, building lives instead of just escaping deaths. Yes, she said with absolute certainty. It really works. Because this is not just sanctuary. It is proof that when systems fail, people can build better systems. That when authority protects abusers, communities can protect survivors instead. That wilderness is not escape from civilization, but reminder of what civilization should be. Safety, connection, belonging. The things every human deserves, and that we create here because nobody else would create them for us. She looked at Rachel directly, meeting eyes that were beginning to hope again. You asked if you can really be safe here. The answer is yes. But more than that, you can be strong here, can be angry here, can heal here, can become whoever you were before abuse and whoever you want to be after. This is your territory now, and in your territory, you decide who you become. Nobody else. Not your abuser. Not the system that failed you. Not the fear that brought you here. You. Always you. That is the only rule that matters. As night deepened over the Emily refuge, Kira stood at the central building's entrance watching the community she had built from nothing but determination and the absolute conviction that survivors deserved better than what the world had given them. Lights glowed in cabin windows. Voices carried on cold air. Children laughed. Women talked. Community existed because people had chosen to make it exist. She thought about the question that Senator had asked during congressional testimony. Why fight instead of run? The answer was clearer now than it had been then. Because running was survival, but fighting was living. Because isolation was safety, but connection was healing. Because one woman hiding in wilderness saved herself, but one woman standing her ground saved everyone who came after. The wolf howled again from distant ridge, wild and free and alive, because someone had chosen compassion over convenience. Kira smiled and whispered into the night that carried sound in unexpected ways, carrying truth to mountains that would remember long after humans forgot. We belong here, all of us, and anyone who tries to take that belonging away will learn what 24 hunters learned, that this land chooses its defenders, and its defenders never back down. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character, or if you know someone who showed this kind of hidden strength when the world needed them most.